Welcome back to the Question Table, a podcast of the Way Home Ministries. I am your host, Sylvia Geronimo. Today's question is one that sounds playful at first and maybe even a little amusing. And this is it. What is the craziest thing you have ever done for someone? When I was sitting with this question, I started thinking of it less crazy because I had some stories. And I think about it in terms of this question being about love, compassion, courage, and what we are willing to risk for another human being. Because beneath every crazy act is usually something deeper, something like loyalty or sacrifice, mercy, even longing, maybe fear or devotion, or even desperation to matter to someone. So there is a crazy story behind it. So as you contemplate this question, what is the craziest thing you have ever done for someone? Let me tell you my crazy story. When I was a pastor at a church one morning, it was one of those mornings where very few people in the office were there that early in the day because it was still a little dark outside. It was the kind of morning where in winter, the snow muffles everything and the world feels quiet and dangerous all at once. I was doing my work in my office when one of my supervisors walked into my office unexpectedly and asked me if I could drive a young woman home. Now, apparently, as he had arrived at church, he had seen that she had crashed her car on her way home from her night shift into a snowbank, and that she needed help getting home safely. Now, you need to understand something about me. I am deeply afraid of driving in snowstorms. And by now it had started snowing, and it was not just gentle snow. This was getting to near blizzard conditions, the kind where visibility is starting to disappear and every vehicle on the road will feel like a potential disaster waiting to happen. But I also felt that I couldn't say no. So I gathered my coat and my bag in a hurry, ushered her into my car, and rushed out the door so quickly that I forgot my phone sitting on my desk, which in hindsight feels like a very important detail. As we drove away, I started making awkward small talk. Honestly, it was less about friendliness and more about calming my own nerves. I was trying to figure out where she lived, roughly piecing together directions, while simultaneously white-knuckling my steering wheel through the snow. I'm not someone who remembers details particularly well either, so I had more of a vague sense of her neighborhood than an actual address. And 10 minutes into the drive, this young lady in the seat next to me passed out. Now, at first, I thought maybe she was exhausted from work or even from the accident. But the more I tried to wake her up, the more I realized something was very wrong. She was completely intoxicated. She was stoned and drunk, barely coherent. Her eyes wouldn't stay open. She could hardly speak. And suddenly, I found myself in one of the strangest situations of my life. There I was, driving through a snowstorm I was terrified of, with a complete stranger unconscious beside me, with no phone, no clear address, and no real idea where I was going. But I had committed to getting her home safely. I remember praying under my breath while driving. I remember gripping the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. I remember feeling afraid and responsible and strangely determined all at the same time and a little bit angry. But somehow, honestly, only by the grace of God and what I can only describe as the Holy Spirit's internal GPS, we eventually arrived at her apartment complex. She woke up enough to stumble out of the car, barely said a word, and slowly disappeared down a snowy pathway between the apartment buildings until I could no longer see her. And then I remember just sitting there afterwards in silence. partly relieved and partly shaken, and partly wondering, what in the world just happened? Friends, it remains one of the craziest things I've ever done for someone. And as I've remembered the story, here is what I've been thinking about lately. Why did I do it? Why do any of us do the things we do for people? Because the craziest things we do for others are rarely rational, but love rarely is too. I think about parents staying awake night after night beside sick children, or friends drive hours in the middle of the night because someone is falling apart, or people empty bank accounts to help family, or they give an organ to save somebody's life. Spouses stay through illness. They forgive infidelity. Strangers pull over to help at accidents. Someone answers a late night phone call even though they are exhausted because they know that the person on the other end is barely hanging on. That is called compassion. And compassion interrupts our plans. It interrupts our comfort, our safety, and our convenience. But that kind of interruption is important because one of the questions underneath today's question is this: what interrupts you? What makes you stop? What makes you willing to inconvenience yourself for someone? If you've ever read the book, The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he writes, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. And I think compassion often arrives as an interruption. We read about this in the New Testament in a story told by Jesus. It's called the story of the Good Samaritan. And in that story, it's really a story about interruption. A man is wounded on the side of the road. Several people pass him by, and maybe they are busy. Maybe they are afraid. Maybe they had important things to do and they didn't stop. But the Samaritan stops. And Jesus tells us something profound in that story, that compassion is not merely feeling something. Compassion moves towards pain. The Samaritan had to stop. He crosses the road. He kneels beside the suffering man. He risks inconvenience and he risks his own safety. And then he spends money. He alters his schedule. And he carries responsibility for someone he doesn't even know. And perhaps that is what makes compassion feel crazy sometimes. Because compassion almost never fits neatly into our lives. Compassion walks courageously through pain, not around it, not away from it, but through it. I think we often imagine courageous people as fearless people, but that has not been my experience. I was afraid that morning in that snowstorm, deeply afraid. And courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving with fear in your pocket. Because true compassion takes courage. It really does. Compassion costs us something. Sometimes it will cost us time. It will cost us our comfort zone. It will cost us emotional energy that sometimes we feel we don't even have anymore. Like that man that stopped, it might cost us our safety and our certainty and sometimes even our reputation, and sometimes it will cause heartbreak. You cannot love deeply and remain untouched. And maybe that is why many of us keep compassion at arm's length. We want caring without cost, and mercy without interruption, and love without vulnerability. But Jesus never modeled distant compassion. He touched lepers. He stopped for blind beggars. He spoke to grieving mothers. He sat with outcasts, and he wept publicly, and he allowed interruptions constantly. And perhaps most strikingly is that I find that Jesus rarely seemed annoyed by needy people. And that convicts me sometimes, because how often do I protect my time and my energy and my plans? I can become so task-orientated that I miss the human being right in front of me. Henri Nouwen once wrote in his book, Here and Now, he said, "Our greatest gift is not our ability to do things, but our ability to be present." That line challenged me because that snowy drive years ago was not about competence. I had no idea what I was doing. I was not particularly prepared either, and I certainly didn't feel brave. I wasn't even really willing to do what was being asked of me. But it forced me to be present. And sometimes love simply says, "Okay, I will stay," or "I will help. I'll walk you home. I won't leave you alone in the storm." So I think the deeper question underneath all of this may actually be, what kind of person are we becoming? Because our answers reveal our values. If the craziest thing I've ever done was rooted in compassion, what does that say about the shape of my soul? And if the craziest thing I do is always being self-protected or self-serving or self-preserving, what does that reveal too? So my question to you today is less about the craziest thing you've done, but maybe more importantly, who is lying wounded on the road in your life today? And I know that that is an uncomfortable question, because there is always someone, it seems, someone grieving quietly, or someone who's lonely, someone who's exhausted and feeling overwhelmed, maybe someone who is hiding an addiction, or someone desperate for one safe conversation and you are so exhausted and peopled out. But maybe there's someone silently hoping another human being notices them. Because sometimes we are so busy trying to survive our own lives that we stop seeing people altogether. But compassion requires us to pay attention and to notice and to pause and sometimes stop and to listen. It requires us to be interruptible. And I think there is one reason asking good questions matters so much, because questions tend to slow us down enough to see and to answer and to think. So, what is the craziest thing you've ever done for someone? Why did you do it? And what did it cost you? And would you do it again? And perhaps the most important question, what was happening in your heart when you said yes? Because maybe your answer reveals not foolishness, but love. And not recklessness, but mercy. And not weakness, but courage. And if you would bear with me, there is just one more layer here too. Sometimes the craziest thing we do is not helping strangers. Sometimes the craziest thing is forgiving someone who wounded us and trusting again after a betrayal, slowly but surely. Sometimes the craziest thing is showing kindness when bitterness could be easier, or remaining tender when a harsh word has been given, and staying compassionate when cynicism feels safer. You see, that kind of compassion may be the hardest courage of all. Suman Kig wrote in her book that the opposite of courage is not fear, but security. I have thought about that sentence often. The opposite of courage is not fear, but security. Because security wants guarantees, and compassion rarely gives them. See, compassion asks us to enter into uncertainty and to love without knowing the outcome, and to give without controlling the response, and to show mercy without assurance that it will be appreciated or even recognized. And yet, time and again, I find that this is the way of Jesus. He wasn't armored or detached, he was just present. There is also something sacred about ordinary acts of mercy, because I believe that every ordinary act of mercy is holy. Because we tend to think holiness happens in dramatic spiritual moments, but holiness happens when you drive someone home, or you make someone soup, or you sit beside a hospital bed and listen carefully, or maybe you just answer that text. It happens when you forgive, when you show up, when you cross the road towards someone else's pain. And I think heaven notices those moments more than we realize, because the kingdom of God is built partly through small, unseen acts of courageous compassion, the kind that no one applauds, the kind that no one posts online, the kind that leaves you sitting in your car afterwards whispering, "Well, that was crazy." And maybe holy love always looks a little crazy to the world. So today, my friend, I want to leave you with a few questions to carry into your week. What is the craziest thing you have ever done for someone? What compelled you to do it? Who taught you compassion? And who in your life right now might need you to cross the road towards them? Not to rescue and not to fix, but simply to be present. Maybe courage for you this week looks small. It looks like a conversation, a phone call, an apology, a meal, or a visit. A kindness, a willingness to be interrupted. The beautiful thing is that compassion does not require perfection, only availability. And maybe that is the invitation today, to become people who are available to love, people willing to walk barefoot through the wounded places of the world, people willing to risk inconvenience for mercy, and people willing to believe that ordinary acts of compassion still matter, because they do. They always do. So thank you for joining me at the question table. And until next time, may you walk humbly, love mercy, and remain courageously open to the people God places in your path.